The old car rumbled down the overgrown driveway, its headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness that clung to the woods. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the outlines of the ancient trees that lined the path. A sense of foreboding, heavy and cold, settled over David as he brought the car to a stop before the imposing facade of Blackwood Manor. David stepped out of the car into the cold, damp air. He took a deep breath, the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves filling his nostrils. He shivered, pulling his coat tighter around himself as he gazed up at the house. It was a grand old Victorian mansion, its once bright paint now faded and peeling. The house loomed over him, its dark windows like empty eyes. A shiver ran down his spine, and for a moment he hesitated. What had he gotten himself into? He shook his head, trying to dispel the unease that was creeping over him. He had to remind himself why he was here. He was a writer, and this was the kind of atmosphere that fueled his imagination. This old house, with its air of melancholy and decay, was the perfect setting for his next horror novel. David pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The air inside was stale and musty, thick with the scent of dust and decay. He fumbled for a light switch, and with a click a dim bulb illuminated the entry hall. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and dust lay thick on the antique furniture. Despite the evidence of neglect, the house retained a certain faded grandeur. A sweeping staircase dominated the entryway, its polished banister cold beneath his touch. Intricate mouldings adorned the high ceilings, and a massive fireplace hinted at past warmth and life. He wandered through the house, each room seeming to echo with the ghosts of its past. There was a grand dining room with a long empty table, and a library with shelves lined with leather-bound books. He ran his fingers along the spines, imagining the stories they held. As he explored further, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The silence of the house was deceptive, broken only by the creaking of floorboards beneath his feet. He found himself pausing frequently, listening intently for any sound that might betray another presence. The first night in Blackwood Manor was the hardest. The storm outside raged on, mimicking the turmoil brewing within David as he lay in the large, canopied bed. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and making the old house groan under the onslaught. Just as he was drifting off to sleep, he heard it.
A whisper, faint and indistinct, seemed to emanate from the shadows in the corner of the room.
He sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear over the storm outside. He told himself it was just the wind playing tricks on him, but the whisper seemed too clear, too close to be dismissed as his imagination. He lay back down, pulling the covers up to his chin, but sleep eluded him. The next morning, over a breakfast of stale bread and instant coffee, he tried to convince himself that the whispers had been a figment of his imagination. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss in Blackwood Manor. As days turned into nights, the strange occurrences became more frequent, more brazen. Objects moved around on their own. Doors creaked open and slammed shut without a breeze. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, sometimes morphing into hushed conversations that sent chills down his spine.
One evening, as he sat writing in the dimly lit study, he saw it. A shadow moved in the periphery of his vision, flitting across the wall and disappearing into the darkness.
He froze, his blood turning to ice. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest, but there was nothing there. He told himself it was just a trick of the light, but the image of the fleeting shadow remained seared into his mind. Fear, cold and clammy, took root in his gut. He tried to focus on his writing, to lose himself in the fictional world he was creating. But the real-life horrors of Blackwood Manor were seeping into his consciousness, blurring the line between reality and fiction. Section 5, a ghostly visitation, face to face with terror. David woke with a gasp, his body bathed in a cold sweat. The room was plunged in darkness, the only sound his ragged breathing. He had been plagued by nightmares, vivid and terrifying, ever since he had moved into Blackwood Manor. Then he saw it. A figure stood at the foot of his bed, its form indistinct in the darkness. It was tall and gaunt, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. He was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream, unable to move.
The figure glided closer, its cold, ethereal hand reaching out towards him.
He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for the touch he knew would send him spiraling into madness. But the touch never came. When he finally dared to open his eyes, the figure was gone.
He lay there for a long time, his heart pounding in his chest, the image of the ghostly apparition burned into his memory. He knew then that he had to uncover the secrets of Blackwood Manor, or risk becoming another victim of its dark past.
Section 6. The Attic's Secret, Unraveling the Past. Driven by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, David decided to explore the attic. It was a space that felt heavy with secrets, shrouded in dust and cobwebs. He had avoided it until now, sensing that it held the key to the house's dark past. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, the hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was thick with dust, and the musty smell of decay made his throat constrict. A single bare bulb cast long shadows across the cluttered space. He made his way carefully through the maze of discarded furniture and forgotten toys, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He knew that somewhere in this dusty attic he would find the answers he sought. And then he saw it. A small wooden chest, tucked away in the corner, hidden beneath a pile of moth-eaten clothes. He knelt down, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached out and lifted the lid. Section 7. The Diary. A tale of tragedy and madness. Inside the chest he found a leather-bound diary, its pages brittle with age. He carefully lifted it out and blew off the dust. The diary belonged to a woman named Amelia, who had lived in the house over a century ago.
As he turned the fragile pages, a tale of love, betrayal, and madness unfolded before his eyes. Amelia had been a beautiful young woman, deeply in love with a man who had never truly loved her back. Driven to despair by his rejection, she had taken her own life within the walls of Blackwood Manor.
But Amelia's story didn't end with her death. Her diary entries became increasingly erratic, filled with ramblings about shadowy figures and voices whispering her name. She wrote of being haunted by something dark and malevolent, something that had driven her to madness. David read on, his heart pounding in his chest, as Amelia's words painted a horrifying picture of the final days of her life. She had become convinced that the house itself was alive, that it was feeding on her despair. Section 8. Confronting the Darkness. A desperate struggle. Armed with the knowledge gleaned from Amelia's diary, David knew he had to confront the darkness that haunted Blackwood Manor. He felt a strange sense of responsibility towards Amelia, a need to help her find peace even in death. Section 9. The Fade to Black. An Unknown Fate. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the house, a scream filled with such anguish and despair that it chilled him to the bone. He felt a searing pain in his head, and then everything went black.
When the police arrived at Blackwood Manor, they found the front door wide open, as if inviting them in. The interior of the house was in disarray, furniture overturned, paintings ripped from the walls. They found David in the grand hallway, lying unconscious at the foot of the stairs. He was clutching a leather-bound diary in his hand, its pages filled with frantic scribblings. But of the ghostly presence that had haunted the house for over a century, there was no sign.
David never remembered what happened that night. He woke up in a hospital bed, his mind a jumbled mess of fragmented memories and chilling nightmares. He left Blackwood Manor as soon as he was able, vowing never to return. Section 10. Lingering Echoes. What becomes of us? But even now, years later, he can't shake the feeling that something followed him home from that house. He sees fleeting shadows in the corner of his eye, hears whispers in the dead of night. He knows deep down that some things can never be truly left behind.
The fate of Amelia, the tormented soul of Blackwood Manor, remains a mystery. Did she find peace after David's confrontation, or does her tortured spirit still linger within the walls of that grand old house?
And what of David himself? Did his encounter with the supernatural leave him forever changed, haunted by the echoes of a darkness he can never fully escape? The answers, like the whispers in the shadows, remain elusive, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved.